With all the latest news and stories that matter right now in footy, it's Tom Brown's News.
Good afternoon. Game day, Friday night football. Lots to discuss on today's podcast, but I'll kick off this morning with the biggest superstar in the game, in particular, Dustin Martin. He's been well covered this week that he's back at Punt Road, training well, looking fit. He trained this morning, I understand, with Trent Cotchin, with obviously most of the team over in Perth. It's a surefire sign, in my view, that I think he'll be cherry ripe and good to go next week, and also a great sign of how invested he is back into the program and also into his fitness. Ralph Carr, his manager, was there watching on this morning. I think Ralph's played a big role in recent weeks, getting Dusty back to the club and back into footy. There's a bit of a funny story actually doing the rounds that Jimmy Barnes helped sway Dusty back into football. I think the crux of the story is that Dusty's been spending a lot of time with Ralph. They hang out, they listen to music, and Ralph's got a lot of good music links, and I think got Jimmy on the phone at one point. So I don't think Jimmy Barnes has persuaded Dusty back into football, as was alluded to on a suggestion, I think, a rumour yesterday on one of the radio stations. But I do think that Jimmy and Dusty did have a phone conversation at one point that was set up by Ralph. But I think Ralph's done a great job helping Dusty in recent weeks. He was back at the club this morning training with Trent Cotchin. I'll show you those pictures on 7 News tonight and on our coverage. But I think it's just fantastic how Dusty's reintegrated into the group next week. It sets up this tantalising prospect of Dusty returning against Collingwood on Saturday afternoon football. That'll be absolutely magnificent if hopefully that happens. But Dusty certainly re-engaged with the Richmond program. Concussion is becoming a tsunami of an issue, according to Peter Jess, the concussion campaigner. I'll try and simplify this as much as possible because it is becoming a very complex issue. But in essence, at the moment, there's an independent review being conducted by a couple of ex-judges of the AFL's concussion policies. The architect of a lot of the AFL's concussion policies, Paul Macquarie, is under a separate review by the Medical Accreditation Board in regards to the types of medical advice he gave during a certain period. I'm not passing prejudgment on that, but it is the subject of a medical review which has been widely reported. Again, not passing prejudgment on the outcome of that. And now the research that underpins the AFL's return to play protocols in terms of the number of days that you've got to miss when you have a concussion. For example, Paddy McCartan this week has to miss at least 12 days. Most of our listeners will be familiar with that period, which was extended by the AFL this year, last year, I should say. The research that underpins that return to play protocol has been questioned in The Age this morning by a journalist, Wendy Carlisle, who I understand is writing a book, I'm told, on the issue of concussion. According to Carlisle's article today, up to 61 concussion tests weren't used in formulating that return-to-play protocol, including Dean Kemp and Chad Rintoul's at the time. I hasten to add again that there's two sides to all this story. The research that underpins that did state that it does not address the long-term outcomes of concussion. So I've spoken to the AFL about this issue. They say, of course, these issues are progressive. It's hard to look at concussion today compared to what we knew when these protocols were formed, I think around 2003 or 2004, and they did update their return-to-play protocols last year. But I think the point is that Peter Jess claims that the return-to-play protocols are based on fake science. Look, that's his view. I doubt that's the case, quite frankly. I'm sure they're based on some science. Again, that's an opinion. But the point is now that there's three huge issues that are going on in the background in regards to concussion. It is a massive issue. It is complex. It is based a lot on science and research papers and all the rest of it. But you've now got the independent review of the concussion policies. The architect of a lot of the AFL's concussion policies is under review from a medical perspective. And also now the research that underpins the return-to-play protocols is being questioned in a leading publication, in this case, The Age. So there's a lot going on in that space. It will continue to be, but that's a bit of an update this afternoon. Some news from the Bombers this morning. The coach, Ben Rutten, confirming that Tipper Woody, unfortunately, has COVID. He's under COVID protocols this weekend, so he'll miss the mandatory 7 days. He wouldn't have played senior footy at this stage anyway, but it's just a bit of an update in that regard. Some questions regarding why the Bombers, who are 1-5, got 3 Friday night games as part of the release of the next stage of the fixture yesterday. They've got Carlton, then St Kilda, then West Coast on Friday nights. Of course, obviously, the Bombers are popular. That's part of the reason. With the buys, which feature in some of those rounds, it's hard to marry up the teams in terms of the 6 and 7 day breaks, or in some cases, the 5 day breaks. That's part of the reason as well. There's also Thursday night footy, so that sort of explains why the Bombers, it's a bit of a surprise, got 3 Friday night games as part of that next stage of the fixture. But that's a bit of an explanation in case you were wondering this afternoon. Throwing forward to this weekend, want to discuss some news implications from some of the game, or at least potential ones. Geelong and Fremantle. I think the interesting point for mine there was that Danger misses another game with that persistent calf concern. Chris Scott explained this week that Danger has obviously been hampered from a training perspective. He hasn't done probably his normal loads. That's why they've erred on the side of caution again this week. A massive game in Adelaide tomorrow afternoon, in particular for Leon Cameron. The Giants are 1-5. They have to really think, you'd have to think they have to beat Adelaide to avoid going 1-6. Now, Leon's situation's interesting. At the start of the season, it's my firm understanding that his management sought an extension or an indication of one at least from the Giants. That wasn't forthcoming. They then parked the discussions until the end of the year. That's his contract discussions. He's out at the end of the year. Leon flagged that himself. There's certainly no language now coming out of the Giants that's in any way supportive of Leon getting an extension. The win-loss record speaks for itself. There's discussion, obviously, about whether these discussions will occur at the end of the season. I think if the win-loss record of the Giants is anything like it is at the moment, they'd have to look at those discussions, I understand, those contract discussions around the middle of the year, because you've got to assess what's out in the marketplace. Now, by way of example, and it's only an example, Alistair Clarkson technically is available. Now, he's at the basketball. He's over in the States this week doing some work out of San Francisco. But, if the Giants made a decision in the middle of the year, it would then allow them to go and assess the market. And I think that's the way it's headed, at least in terms of the win-loss ratio at the moment. I hope for Leon's sake they can improve that win-loss ratio. But I think the Giants will look at those contract discussion points in the middle of the year if Leon can't improve that win-loss ratio. And there's certainly been no language out of the Giants in recent weeks to indicate that's anything but the case at the moment. So just keep a very close eye on that situation. In terms of the other games of interest for mine this weekend, Melbourne going for 14 wins in a row. They're now missing Goodwin, the coach, Petty, Jackson, Pickett, and Sparrow. The latest one, of course, was Petty, who was added last night. So they're back at training today. They all trained the 22 this morning, so there's no indications there's any further COVID, but it's obviously a possibility. So keep an eye on that this weekend. The Bulldogs and Essendon. The Bulldogs are interesting. Grand finalists last year. They're 2-4. That have to beat the Bombers. You'd think I've touched on some of the Bombers news, but an important game, that one for the Bulldogs. Sydney Lions, for mine, probably the game of the round based on their ladder positions and their form and all the rest of it. The two most likely sides for mine at the moment that could potentially challenge Melbourne at the sharp end of the season. So that'll be a great viewing at 4:40 or so on Sunday. A couple of other news points. Carlton have suffered a bit of a double injury blow this morning. Carroll will make his debut, but Hewitt has a corked calf, and Mitch McGovern has re-injured his hamstring again and will be out for an extended period of time, which is unfortunate for Mitch McGovern. That's been a persistent issue as far as his fitness is concerned. And I'll just leave you with a little bit of a nugget. It's sort of basically I form this view just based on my observations over the last week or so. Andrew Dillon and Travis Auld are both with Gillon McLachlan in America, negotiating or trying to negotiate a digital part of the broadcast rights or a streaming part of the broadcast rights, along with a potential free-to-air component with Paramount and 10. It's my firm view now that it's highly likely that the successor to Gill will come from Andrew Dillon or Travis Auld. They're on the trip, and I think Richard Goyder has dispatched them to go and do that deal, and it would be highly surprising if it wasn't one of those two for mine. But don't miss all the Triple M action this weekend. It starts tonight, Friday Night Football. Thanks so much for joining our podcast during the week. There's been lots of news. I think Dusty will be back next week, which is hugely exciting. But Triple M racks football.